Welcome to episode 3 of Gray Lightning, my video blog about making and playing. In my last episode, I covered my more traditional making activities, and in this episode I'd like to focus on some of the things I've made in the last year using laser cutters at my makerspace, TechShop. So laser cutters are computerized, and the instructions that drive them come from drawings that you make in computer drawing software. Now, I use a program called Adobe Illustrator, but there are other types of drawing programs that you can use to drive laser cutters as well. The laser cutter is very simple to use. You just pull up the drawing you want to execute, you push print, tell it what kind of material you want to cut, and the laser cutter does the rest of the work. So my very first laser cutter project was this piece here. This is cut in acrylic. And it's a motif from my favorite video game, Dragon Age Inquisition. And I was really happy with it, but when I showed it to my friends, they weren't familiar with Dragon Age, and they thought the eye was a little creepy. So my second project, I did these leaves, and they seemed to be a little bit more comfortable with that. So laser cutters can cut a lot of different material, acrylic, but they can also cut wood. So one of our next projects, and I say our because my husband is also a maker and he helps me with many of my projects at TechShop. So we made these wooden coasters, and the very first version you see here, both the leaf and the background were cut out of wood inlay and glued to 1/4-inch plywood on the back. And then in our next version, we cut the leaves out of wood inlay, but we cut pockets into the birch plywood itself, and that was really easier to assemble. And then in our third version, we did that, but we also cut sayings into the background. And everything you see here, including the cork for the back, was cut and engraved on a laser cutter. I think the coasters are a really good example of how creating is an iterative process. And every time you do something, you learn something that helps you improve your technique or your design. We also cut trivets, like this example here, cut in 1/4-inch cedar plywood. My son's hobby is painting miniatures, and miniatures are tiny little models that are supposed to be used for gaming, but they're really works of art that deserve to be displayed. This particular one here is a little gray light that I designed on a website and had 3D printed, and then my son painted it for me. And you see how tiny they are. And all the display shelves he had were designed for books and way too big. So what we did is we designed a series of shelves. This is just one of a series that are really designed for displaying small items. And I think this is a good example of how the problems you run into in your everyday life can really be an inspiration for your creativity. That's where the saying, necessity is the mother of invention, comes from. So I told you I like tabletop games, and many of those games use tokens, and I decided to recreate my tokens from my favorite games on the laser cutter, and I love the way they turned out, and I love the way they feel, but we were using little plastic cups on the side of the game board to keep them organized. So then we came up with the idea to make a token tray. And that was a much classier solution, and we really liked the way the colored tokens looked in the clear. They kind of glow in the clear acrylic. So then the next idea we came up with is, let's really make them glow. Let's build a light box that fits underneath, and you can turn on and off, and it lights them up. To make the light box, we had to learn how to do low voltage lighting, and that led us on to even other more interesting projects. And so one of those is Edgelet Acrylic. And one of the characteristics of clear acrylic is that when you put lighting along the edge of it, it makes whatever's engraved on it glow. So here's an example of a project that we made. This is actually a word cloud based on the US Constitution. So it means that the words that are biggest in it are the words that show up most frequently in the Constitution. It's a great visual way to get an overview of what's important in a document. And so I engraved and cut this as an example on the laser cutter. It's sitting in a lighting tray that has a strip of LEDs in the bottom, and those LEDs are driven by this small remote. So this is the same exact technology we're using in the gray lightning sign here, except the strip is at the top and it's hanging from it instead of sitting in it. So these are just some of the examples of things that we've made in the last year with a laser cutter. And a laser cutter is just one example of many pieces of equipment available at a makerspace like TechShop. And we'll be covering all sorts of interesting projects using those pieces of equipment. So now, in my next episode, I want to switch gears from making and talk about the playing things that we'll be doing in Gray Lightning.